billionaire's empire paused for one hospital call. Not a deal, but a pediatric ER. Sir, you are the only emergency contact for your maid's daughter. At 10:30 p.m., a phone call shatters the silence of a billionaire's penthouse. On the line is a nurse from the pediatric ER. A 9-year-old girl, Sophie Miller, is in critical condition. Her mother, Susan, is nowhere to be found. The hospital has one lead, an old emergency card found in the girl's backpack. The only contact listed? Alexander Grayson. He's her mother's employer, a man who barely knows her name. While he runs an empire, his maid has been fighting a desperate, hidden battle, one that led to her arrest and her daughter's collapse. He's the only one who can help. But why him? And before I forget, where are you tuning in from today? Leave a comment below. Now settle in. I hope you enjoy this story. Alexander Grayson's life was measured in seconds, and he was losing them. The city glittered below his office, a carpet of cold diamonds. But he saw only the reflection of the man in the glass, tired, impatient, and trapped. The pen in Alexander Grayson's hand stopped moving. It was 10:30 p.m. The only sound in the penthouse office was the faint hum of the air system. His desk, a massive piece of dark mahogany, was a fortress. On it sat reports detailing a shipping logistics deal worth $500 million. Alexander leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He hated logistics. They were messy, full of human error. He preferred the clean finality of numbers on a balance sheet. His eyes drifted to the wall. It was not a wall of art, but a wall of history, a shrine. In the center, a black and white photograph dominated the room. General William Stonewall Grayson, his grandfather. The photo showed him standing in the mud of a foreign battlefield, straight-backed, decorated, and staring down the camera with an iron will. Alexander Grayson had inherited the general's fortune. He had inherited his sharp blue eyes. But he feared he had inherited none of the man's strength. He had spent his life trying to prove otherwise, building Grayson Holdings into a global power. He built with steel and concrete, not with courage and men. A phone buzzed. Not his private line, not his secure line. It was the main line to the penthouse, an old number he kept for household staff and deliveries. He frowned. He employed a full-time residence manager, Mrs. Finch, to handle such things. She should be filtering calls. It buzzed again, insistent. Annoyed, Alexander jabbed the speaker button. This is Grayson. His voice was sharp. A pause. Mr. Alexander Grayson? The voice was female, hurried, and crackling with static. I just said that. Who is this? Sir, my name is Nurse Davis. I'm calling from City Central Hospital. From the Pediatric Emergency Department. Alexander's irritation turned to confusion. Pediatric? You have the wrong number. He started to press the button to disconnect. Wait. Sir, please, the nurse said, her voice rising. Are you Alexander Grayson of Grayson Holdings? He paused. Yes. I'm calling about a patient. A 9-year-old girl. Her name is Sophie Miller. The name meant nothing. I don't know anyone by that name. You've made a mistake. Mr. Grayson, please listen, the nurse said, her professionalism strained. Sophie was brought in 30 minutes ago. She's in critical condition. We are trying to find her mother, Susan Miller. Susan Miller. Alexander's mind flashed on an image. A quiet woman in a simple gray uniform. She was the one who cleaned this very office. She was efficient, silent, and invisible. She came in the mornings, finished before he arrived, and was gone. He sometimes passed her in the long marble hallway of his penthouse. A polite Mr. Grayson. A quick nod from him. Nothing more. She's your maid? Alexander said flatly. Yes, sir. The nurse replied, clearly relieved. We found a card in the girl's backpack. It was an old in case of emergency card from her school. It listed her mother, Susan, and on the back, under other contact, she wrote your name. Just Alexander Grayson and this phone number. Alexander stood up. The massive office suddenly felt cold. That's impossible, he said. Sir, it's the only number we have. We cannot reach the mother. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. The neighbor who called 911 didn't know where she was. The nurse took a shaky breath. Mr. Grayson, your name is the only name on this card. You are her only emergency contact. A deep, unfamiliar silence filled the room. The billion-dollar logistics report seemed ridiculous. His grandfather's stern gaze felt heavier, like an accusation. Why him? A man she barely knew. A man who paid her salary through 3 layers of household management. What is wrong with the child? He asked. His voice had changed. The impatience was gone. She's not breathing well, sir. She has a history of severe asthma, according to the neighbor. But she's not responding as she should. She's very small, sir. And she's not waking up. And the mother is missing. It was a statement, not a question. We cannot find her, Nurse Davis confirmed. Sir, I know this is a strange request, but the doctors need to speak with someone. We need information. We may need consent for more aggressive treatment. And this little girl is all alone. Alexander looked at his grandfather's picture. The general had a motto carved into the base of his statue in the lobby downstairs. Duty is the blood of honor. He had always thought it was a bit dramatic. I'm on my way, Alexander said, and cut the call. He bypassed his driver. He grabbed his keys and his wallet, leaving the billion-dollar deal unsigned on the desk. He walked out of the office, his footsteps echoing in the empty penthouse. He felt the general's eyes on his back the entire way. The drive to City Central Hospital was 20 minutes. Alexander did it in 10. He left his black Bentley at the curb by the ambulance bay, ignoring the shouts of a security guard. The emergency room was a world he had only seen in movies. It was loud. It smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and fear. People were weeping on plastic chairs. Others stared blankly at a television screen. Alexander, in his $8,000 bespoke suit, was an alien. He was a creature from a different, cleaner planet. He walked to the main desk. A woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. Can I help you? I'm here for Sophie Miller. I spoke with Nurse Davis. The woman's eyes widened just slightly. She recognized him. Or, at least, she recognized his suit and the air of absolute authority he carried. One moment, Mr. Grayson. A moment later, the nurse from the phone appeared. She was young, her face worn with fatigue. Mr. Grayson? I'm Nurse Davis. Thank you for coming. Where is she? Alexander asked. This way. She led him past a curtain into the pediatric wing. The noise faded, replaced by the rhythmic, lonely beeping of machines. She's in here, Nurse Davis said, stopping at a small room. Dr. Patel is with her now. Alexander looked through the glass. He had prepared himself for, he didn't know what. A problem to be solved. An annoyance. He was not prepared for the child. She was tiny, a small, frail thing lost in an adult-sized hospital bed. Her hair was blonde and matted with sweat. A clear oxygen mask fogged with each shallow, rattling breath. Wires snaked from under her small gown, connecting her to a tall, blinking monitor. A man in blue scrubs, Dr. Patel, was shining a small light into her eyes. He looked up as Alexander entered. You are Mr. Grayson? The doctor asked. He had a weary, intelligent face. Yes. What is happening? Dr. Patel sighed, clipping the light to his pocket. It's not good. She came in with what the neighbor assumed was an asthma attack. We treated her for it. But she's not responding. Her oxygen levels are dangerously low, and she's completely unresponsive. Unconscious. Yes. And it doesn't look like a simple asthma attack. Her fever is high. Her blood pressure is low. We're running tests, but... He paused. Are you a relative? No. I'm her mother's employer. The doctor and nurse exchanged a look. It was the same look of confusion Alexander felt. I see, Dr. Patel said carefully. Well, Mr. Grayson, the main issue is this. We are flying blind. We have no medical history. We don't know her allergies. We don't know what medications she takes. The mother, Susan, Alexander pressed. You haven't found her? We've called her phone a dozen times, Nurse Davis said, stepping forward. Voicemail. We sent a police cruiser to her listed address to notify her. And the nurse looked down at her chart. Sir, the officer reported back. The apartment is empty. The landlord said she was evicted 3 weeks ago. Alexander felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Evicted. The quiet woman who cleaned his marble floors was homeless. And no one has seen her or the girl since, Nurse Davis added. That's not right, Alexander said, thinking. The neighbor called 911. Where did the neighbor call from? A different apartment. A few blocks away, Dr. Patel said. The neighbor, a Mrs. Romano, said Susan Miller sometimes paid her to watch Sophie. But tonight, Susan was late. Hours late. When Mrs. Romano went to check on Sophie at the place they were staying, she heard the girl coughing. She found her on the floor, struggling to breathe. Where was Susan? The neighbor didn't know. She just said Susan had been acting strange. Desperate. She said Susan often left the girl alone. A dark, cold anger rose in Alexander. He was a man who valued logic and responsibility above all. Leaving a sick child alone was an unforgivable failure. So we have a missing mother, Alexander said, his voice hardening. A sick child, and no answers. That's the sum of it, Dr. Patel agreed. And I need to be frank, Mr. Grayson. I suspect a severe, underlying infection. Maybe pneumonia. But her blood work, it's strange. Her white blood cell count is practically zero. It's as if her body isn't fighting at all. He looked at Sophie, so small in the bed. We need to do more, Dr. Patel continued. A spinal tap. A bone marrow aspiration. We need to find out what's suppressing her immune system. But those are invasive procedures. They require parental consent. Without it, our hands are tied unless she deteriorates further. And by then, Alexander finished. It could be too late. Yes. Alexander turned and walked out of the room, into the hallway. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He did not call his lawyers. He did not call his COO. He called the one man who could solve impossible, messy problems. The phone rang once. Yes, sir. Frank, Alexander said to his head of security. I have a situation. I need you to find someone. A woman. Her name is Susan Miller. She's the mother of a 9-year-old girl named Sophie. The housekeeper, sir? Frank's voice was steady. He knew everything. The same. She's missing. Her daughter is in City Central Hospital, pediatric ICU. Susan was evicted 3 weeks ago. I need to know where she is. I need to know why she isn't here. I'm on it, Frank said. One more thing. I need her personnel file. Now, I want to know everything. Her previous addresses, her references, any family she listed. Anything. Understood. I'll call you back. Alexander hung up. He leaned against the sterile, pale green wall. The hospital hummed around him. He ignored the dozen notifications on his phone about the logistics deal. They seemed to be from another life. He looked back through the glass at the little girl. He saw the blonde hair. He suddenly, vividly, remembered Susan Miller. He had passed her just 2 days ago. She had looked tired, thinner. She had kept her head down. He had walked right past her, his mind on interest rates. He had built an empire of steel and glass, but he had never truly seen the person who polished it. An hour passed. It felt like a year. Alexander sat in a plastic chair built for someone half his size. He had not moved. He had fielded 2 calls from his COO, Robert, telling him the logistics partners were getting nervous. Alexander told him to make them wait. His phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He snatched it up. Frank. Yes, sir. I have the file. And I have a situation. What do you mean? The personnel file is thin, Frank said. Susan Miller. Hired 2 years ago. Part-time. Cleared a basic background check. No family listed. No husband. The address she gave us is the one she was evicted from. That's it. Nothing. Not quite, sir. She listed one reference. A parish priest in the Bronx. I called him. The priest said Susan is a widow. Her husband was a Marine. Died in service 8 years ago. A veteran. Alexander felt a cold prickle. His grandfather's legacy was built on the backs of men like that. Sir, Frank continued, his voice tight. That's not the situation. I've been making calls. Checking local precincts, shelters. And I found her, Mr. Grayson. Where is she? Is she coming here? There was a heavy pause. She can't, sir, Frank said. She was arrested 2 nights ago. Alexander stood up. Arrested? For what? Petty theft, sir. Shoplifting. Frank's voice was grim. She was caught stealing food and a box of syringes. The anger returned, sharp and clear. Stealing. Syringes. While her daughter was. But that's not the worst of it, sir, Frank said, cutting off Alexander's dark thoughts. I spoke to the desk sergeant at the 40th precinct. Susan Miller has been in a holding cell for 48 hours. She hasn't been processed because the system is backed up. Get her out, Alexander ordered. I'm trying, sir. But she used her one phone call when she was arrested. The sergeant said she was hysterical, crying about her daughter. She kept giving them one name to call. Your name. Alexander froze. The officers, Frank said, thought she was delusional. A homeless woman shoplifter claiming to know Alexander Grayson. They dismissed it. They never made the call. Alexander looked through the glass at the tiny, pale girl fighting for her life. Her mother had been trying to reach him, the only person she believed could help. And he had been sitting in his glass tower, annoyed that his household phone was ringing. Mr. Grayson? Dr. Patel's voice broke his trance. Alexander turned. The doctor was holding a printout. His face was grave. We got the first labs back, Dr. Patel said. This is not asthma. This is not pneumonia. Mr. Grayson, this child has almost no immune system. The markers, they are consistent with a very rare, very aggressive genetic disorder. Something called SCID. Severe combined immunodeficiency. What does that mean? It means, the doctor said, that a common cold could kill her. And right now, she has a massive infection that her body cannot fight. He looked Alexander in the eye. If we don't find her mother, if we don't get a history and consent for treatment, Sophie Miller will not survive the night. Alexander Grayson looked from the doctor's grim face to the small, pale child in the bed. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. It was a clock, counting down. Do it, Alexander said. Dr. Patel blinked. Mr. Grayson, I just explained. I need parental consent. Legally, I cannot perform a spinal tap on a minor without her guardian. And I told you her mother is in a holding cell, Alexander said, his voice dropping to a low, cold command. She is unavailable. I am here. I am the only one here. You will do the test you need to do to save this child's life. Grayson Holdings will assume all legal and financial liability. Do you understand me? Dr. Patel was stunned. He had never seen this man before, but he recognized the power. It was not a request. It was a change in the laws of physics. My legal team will have a document here in 10 minutes, Alexander continued, already dialing his phone. It will indemnify this hospital, and you personally, against any lawsuit. Now, please, go to work. Dr. Patel simply nodded. He turned to Nurse Davis. Let's prep her. Get the kit. Now. As the medical team sprang into action, Alexander turned back to his phone. He was not calling his lawyers yet. He was calling Frank. Frank, tell me you have her. Sir, it's a mess, Frank's voice crackled. The 40th precinct is a zoo. She's in the system, but they can't find her paperwork to process her out. They're telling me it could be morning. Morning is too late, Alexander said, walking briskly down the hall. The girl is dying, Frank. I need her mother now. I understand, sir. But this is the city. Bureaucracy. Frank, Alexander cut him off. He stopped at a window overlooking a dark courtyard. Do you remember the harbor deal in '09? When the union boss locked our new crane on the dock? Yes, sir. I remember. What did I tell you to do? You told me to get the crane, sir, Frank replied, a new understanding in his voice. This is the same, Frank. Get the mother. I don't care about the system. I don't care about the paperwork. Call the commissioner. Call the mayor. Tell them Alexander Grayson is at City Central Hospital, cleaning up a mess their officers made. Tell them they have 10 minutes to release Susan Miller to my custody, or Grayson Holdings will file a billion-dollar lawsuit against the city for wrongful arrest, police negligence, and the endangerment of a minor. Am I clear? Yes, Mr. Grayson. 10 minutes. The line clicked dead. Alexander stood alone in the hallway. The adrenaline faded, replaced by something heavy and unfamiliar. He had just used his power like a club. He did it all the time in business. But this felt different. It felt raw. He walked back to the room. The medical team was working around Sophie. He stood in the doorway, an intruder in their sterile world. Mr. Grayson? It was Nurse Davis. She was holding a small, faded pink backpack. We found this with her. I thought you might want to see it. She handed it to him. It was cheap. The zipper was broken. He took it, feeling clumsy. It was impossibly light. He opened the main pocket. Inside, there was no technology. No phone, no tablet. There was a single coloring book, mostly full. A plastic bag with 3 crayons. One red, one blue, one broken green. And a small, worn teddy bear. It was missing an eye. Alexander pulled the bear out. It was soft from years of being held. He thought of his own childhood. It was a world of tutors, nannies, and boarding schools. He had horses, but no pets. He had possessions, but he could not remember a single toy he had loved. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of something. Pity. No, it was deeper. It was shame. He had passed this child's mother in his marble hallway. He had seen her, but he had not seen her. To him, she was a function, a line item in his household budget. And to her, he was what? A lifeline. The only name she put on an emergency card. Why? He sat in the hard plastic chair, the small bear in his large hand. He He looked at Sophie. Her blonde hair was damp on the pillow. She looked nothing like him. Nothing like anyone he knew. She was just a child, and she was alone. His phone buzzed. It was Frank. "She's out, sir." Alexander stood, relief washing over him. "Where is she?" "In the car with me. We're 5 minutes from the hospital." "But sir, you need to know about the syringes." Alexander's stomach tightened again. "Go on." "I got into her property bag at the precinct. They were still in there. They weren't what you think." "What were they?" "They're for a drug called gamma norm," Frank said, his voice strained, as if he were reading it. "It's an immunoglobulin. It's used to treat. Well, it's used to treat people with no immune system." Alexander looked through the glass at Sophie. "At Dr. Patel." "She wasn't buying illegal drugs, sir," Frank said quietly. "She was buying life-saving medicine." The box was empty. The arresting officer said she was crying, telling him she needed a refill. They thought she was a junkie. "Where did she get it?" "That's not over the counter." "It's not." "I made one more call," Frank said. "To that priest in the Bronx. He finally told me. Susan's husband, the Marine? He didn't just die. He died in a VA hospital from a sudden infection after a routine surgery. His immune system," Alexander whispered. "The priest says the doctors were baffled," Frank continued. "They suspected a genetic flaw. It seems his daughter inherited it. Susan has been fighting this alone, sir. She had insurance, but it ran out. Then she had state aid, but she missed an appointment because of work, and she got lost in the paperwork. She's been paying for this medicine out of pocket. Then, she couldn't afford it. So she's been buying it, wherever she could. Black market. Probably from Mexico." Alexander felt sick. Utterly sick. He had built an empire on cold, hard logic. But this was beyond logic. This was a nightmare. She was evicted because she spent her rent on the medicine, Alexander realized. "That's how it looks, sir," Frank said. "We're pulling up to the ER." "Bring her," Alexander ordered, and hung up. He turned as Dr. Patel exited the room, pulling off a mask. "We have the preliminary results from the spinal tap," the doctor said, his face pale. "It's not just an infection. It's meningitis. Bacterial. It's moving incredibly fast. The black market drugs she was giving her, they probably kept her alive, but they were a fraction of the proper dose. It was like trying to stop a flood with a paper cup. What do you need?" "We need a donor," Dr. Patel said flatly. "Antibiotics will fight the infection, but they won't fix the underlying problem. The SCID. Her body is a house with no doors. Anything can get in. She will live her entire life in a bubble or what? A bone marrow transplant. It's the only cure. It would give her a new immune system. But the odds of finding a match are..." The doors to the emergency wing burst open. A woman stumbled through, flanked by Frank. It was Susan Miller, but not the quiet, composed woman from his hallway. This Susan was a wreck. Her cheap uniform was torn. Her face was bruised from where she had likely fallen. Her eyes were wide and frantic, scanning the hall. She saw Alexander. Her face crumpled. "Mr. Grayson," she whispered, a look of profound shame and terror. I didn't know who else to call. I'm so sorry." "Susan," Alexander said, his voice softer than he had ever heard it. "She's this way." He led her to the room. The moment she saw Sophie in the bed, a sound escaped her, a deep, animal wail of grief. She rushed to the bedside, collapsing against the rail. "My baby," she sobbed, brushing the damp blonde hair from Sophie's face. "Oh, Sophie, I'm so sorry. Mama's here. Mama's here." Nurse Davis gently touched her arm. "Ma'am." "Susan, I'm Nurse Davis. Dr. Patel needs you to sign these." Susan stared at the consent forms, her hand shaking so badly she couldn't take the pen. What is it?" "It's to save her life," Dr. Patel said, stepping forward. "Susan, I'm Dr. Patel. I know about the SCID. I know what you've been doing. You've kept her alive. Now, I need you to let me take over." Susan nodded, tears streaming down her face. She scribbled her name on the forms. "Good," Dr. Patel said. "Now, the transplant. We need to find a donor. We need to test you first. You're the most likely match." "Yes," Susan said, wiping her nose. "Yes, of course. Anything." A phlebotomist was already there, swabbing Susan's arm. Alexander watched the scene. The small girl. The weeping mother. The quiet, grim efficiency of the medical team. He was an outsider. He had paid for the lawyers. He had gotten the mother here. His part was done. He could go back to his tower. back to his logistics deal. But he looked at Sophie. He looked at her small hand, curled on the white sheet. He remembered his grandfather. Duty is the blood of honor. His grandfather had led men. He had been responsible for them, for their lives. Alexander looked at Susan, a widow of a Marine, a woman who worked for him, in his house. She was, in a way, one of his. He stepped forward. The doctor, the nurse, and Susan all looked at him. What about me? Alexander Grayson asked. Dr. Patel looked confused. Sir, you're testing her, Alexander said, nodding at Susan. Test me too. For the transplant. Dr. Patel stared. Mr. Grayson, the odds of a non-relative being a match are 1 in a million. It's statistically impossible. I've built a career on impossible odds, Doctor, Alexander said. He was already rolling up the sleeve of his $8,000 suit. Test me. Susan Miller watched, stunned, as the phlebotomist, a young man who looked like he was barely out of school, nervously tied a blue tourniquet around the billionaire's arm. Alexander Grayson's sleeve was rolled up, revealing a strong forearm. He did not wince as the needle slid in. He simply stared straight ahead, at the wall, as if he were closing a deal. The phlebotomist drew 4 vials of dark red blood. He labeled them with a practiced hand, his movements quick, eager to be finished. Thank you, sir, the young man mumbled, applying a small cotton ball. Alexander just nodded, pulling his sleeve down. He adjusted his cufflink, a simple, heavy gold piece that was probably worth more than the phlebotomist's car. Susan, we've got you, the phlebotomist said, turning to her. Susan sank into the chair, her body trembling with a new kind of shock. She presented her arm. She had given blood so many times for Sophie's tests that she barely felt the stick. Her mind was reeling. Why is he still here? She had expected him to be angry. She had expected him to call security. Or, at best, to send a lawyer, a fixer, to handle the problem. But he was here. He had gotten her out of jail. He had saved her daughter's life by forcing the doctors to act. And now, he had just given his own blood for a test that the doctor himself called impossible. The phlebotomist left with the samples. Alexander turned to Frank, who had been standing silently by the hallway entrance, a ghost in a dark suit. Frank, Alexander said, his voice low. Susan's arrest. The shoplifting. Yes, sir. It's gone, Alexander said. I want the charges dropped. I want the arrest record expunged. I want it to have never happened. Whatever it takes. Whoever you have to call. Understood, sir, Frank replied. And her apartment, Alexander continued, not looking at Susan, but speaking for her. The eviction. Find the landlord. Pay whatever is owed. Pay 3 months in advance. Get her belongings out of storage. Get the power turned back on. Susan's head snapped up. Mr. Grayson, no. I can't. I can't ask you to. Alexander finally looked at her. His blue eyes were not kind, not yet. They were assessing, sharp. You didn't ask, Mrs. Miller. I'm telling you. This situation is a failure of logistics. I'm correcting it. He saw the fierce, bruised pride in her eyes. Your daughter will need a clean, safe place to come home to, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. Let's focus on that. Frank nodded once. I'll handle it. I'll also post a man at her apartment, just to ensure it's secure until she returns. He melted back into the hallway. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by the hum of the hospital. They were alone in the small, sterile waiting nook. Susan sat with her hands clenched in her lap. She was no longer the invisible woman who polished his floors. She was a mother, exposed and terrified. Alexander sat across from her. He did not check his phone. He did not call his office. He just sat, waiting. He was a man who hated waiting. He controlled every minute of his life. Here, he was powerless. He looked at her. Mrs. Miller. Susan. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. You need to tell me, he said. The emergency card. Why my name? Not the priest. Not your neighbor. Me. Susan looked down at her hands. She twisted the thin, cheap ring on her finger. Her wedding ring. She started, her voice a whisper. I was so scared. Always. Every day. She took a shaky breath. When my husband, David, was in the VA hospital, he wasn't a complainer. He was a Marine. Strong. He never complained about anything. But he was dying. And the doctors, they were slow. They were busy. They treated him like a number. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the dark. I would sit there, holding his hand, and he would watch the news on the little television. Sometimes they would show stories about you, about Grayson Holdings, or about your grandfather, the general. Alexander tensed. David admired your grandfather, Susan said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. He had a book about him. He said the general was a man who got things done, a man who led from the front, a man who took responsibility for his men. He said, "That's a man who understands duty, Susan. They don't make them like that anymore." She looked back at Alexander. When Sophie got sick, when the SCID was diagnosed, I knew what I was facing. It was the same thing that took David. But now it was my little girl. And I was alone. The paperwork, the social workers, the bills. I was drowning, Mr. Grayson. I would come to work, she continued, her voice gaining a desperate strength. I'd walk into your home. It's like a palace. And I would see that picture on your office wall. The general. He's looking right at you. Every day. I always saw you, Mr. Grayson. You. In your suit. You always looked so in control. You were powerful. You were building things. You were a Grayson. And I thought, if anything ever happened, if Sophie was in trouble, you were the only person I knew powerful enough to fight the system. The system that let my husband die. The system that was letting my daughter slip away. She started to cry again, silent, awful tears of shame. It was stupid. It was a fantasy, a desperate prayer. I wrote your name on that little card, and I prayed I would never, ever have to find out what would happen. I am so sorry to bring this to you, to your life. Alexander said nothing for a long time. He had spent his whole life running from that portrait. He had tried to build an empire bigger than his grandfather's legacy. He thought duty and honor were old, dusty words. They were abstracts, good for carving into stone, but useless in a boardroom. He had been wrong. To this woman, his name meant something. It meant duty. It meant a lifeline, a responsibility he had never earned, and had no idea he even had. You have nothing to be sorry for, Susan, he said. His voice was thick. Before he could say more, Dr. Patel walked down the hall. His face was not good. Susan, he said, his voice gentle. I have the results of your test. Susan stood up, her entire body rigid with hope. And, am I a match? Can I save her? Dr. Patel looked down. He shook his head. Susan, I'm so sorry. You're a carrier for the gene, as was your husband. But as a donor, you're not a match. Not even close. Your blood types are compatible, but the tissue markers, the HLA, it would be a severe rejection. The hope drained from Susan's face. It was a physical thing. She deflated, her shoulders slumping. She put a hand on the wall to steady herself. No, she whispered. No. You have to test again. It's wrong. We ran it twice, Dr. Patel said, his voice full of pity. It's not a match. We will, of course, put her on the national registry immediately. But with her rare HLA type, it could take months. Years. And in her current condition. She doesn't have years, Susan said, her voice cracking. She doesn't even have weeks. We will do everything we can, the doctor said. The antibiotics are fighting the meningitis. But her immune system is gone. We will have to keep her in a sterile bubble. But she's so weak. Another infection. He didn't need to finish. Alexander, who had been listening, stepped forward. What about mine? Dr. Patel looked at him, confused. Your what? My test, Alexander said. My blood. The 1 in a million shot. Dr. Patel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mr. Grayson, I appreciate the gesture. I truly do. But the lab is backed up. We have other critical patients. Running a complex HLA typing on a non-relative, it's a waste of resources. The chances are infinitesimal. I don't care about the chances, Alexander said, his patience snapping. I'm paying for it. I'm paying for all of this. I want that test run. And I want it run now. Dr. Patel looked taken aback by the command. That's not how it works. I can't just. Yes, you can, Alexander said. He pulled out his phone. Or I can call the hospital administrator, who I believe is a man named Stephen Joyce. I sit on the board of his son's university. I am sure he would be fascinated to hear that his doctors are refusing to run a test. On my personal request. It was blunt. It was ugly. It was the full, crushing weight of his power. Dr. Patel looked at Susan's devastated face. He looked at the billionaire who was, impossibly, still here. I'll see what I can do, he said. I'll try to get it expedited. Don't try, doctor, Alexander said, his voice quiet and cold. Do it. The doctor nodded and walked away. Alexander and Susan were left alone again in the hallway. The clock on the wall showed 3 a.m. The city was asleep. The logistics deal was probably dead. Alexander didn't care. He looked at Susan, who was staring blankly at the floor, lost in her own private hell. He did the only thing he could think to do. He sat down, and he waited with her. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The 3 a.m. quiet of the hospital deepened. It became the 4 a.m. stillness, a time when the world seemed to be holding its breath. Alexander Grayson did not move from the plastic chair. It was, by far, the most uncomfortable chair he had ever sat in. His back ached. His legs were stiff. He felt the grit of sleeplessness behind his eyes. He was a man who slept 4 hours a night in a custom-built bed, but this was different. This was exhaustion. This was waiting. Susan sat huddled, a thin hospital blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had stopped crying. She was now in that numb, quiet place beyond tears. She stared at the closed door of Sophie's room. "You should get coffee," she said, her voice raspy. She didn't look at him. "I'm fine," Alexander replied. He said it could be hours. The test. He said it was a waste of time. She was just talking, filling the silence. He's right. It was kind of you to offer, Mr. Grayson. But it's impossible. Let's wait for the results, Alexander said. Susan finally turned to him. Her eyes were hollow. Why are you doing this? You got me out. You paid for. You saved her. You don't even know us. Alexander looked at her. He thought of her words. A man who got things done. A man who led from the front. Your husband was a Marine, Alexander said. It was not a question. Yes. 8 years, Susan whispered. He loved it. He believed in it. He believed in honor. My grandfather, Alexander said, the general. He lived by one word, duty. I spent my whole life hearing that word. I thought it meant winning, building, being the strongest. He looked down at his own hands. They were clean, manicured. They had never held a weapon. They had never known hardship. I think I was wrong, he said. I think duty just means staying. It means not turning away. He looked back at her. I'm staying. Susan held his gaze. For the first time, she saw the man behind the billion-dollar suit. She saw the fatigue in his eyes. She saw the iron will that his grandfather had passed down. She gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of understanding. And they went back to waiting. At 5:15 a.m., the hallway door swung open. Dr. Patel walked toward them. He was not walking. He was almost running. He was holding a single piece of paper. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Susan leaped to her feet, the blanket falling to the floor. Doctor? What is it? Is she? She's the same, Dr. Patel said, breathless. The antibiotics are holding the meningitis, barely. But the test. Mr. Grayson's test. Alexander stood up slowly. You said it was impossible. Dr. Patel looked from Alexander to Susan and back to the paper in his shaking hand. I've been a transplant coordinator for 15 years. I have seen 1 in 100,000 matches. I've seen matches in different ethnic groups. I have never, ever seen this. What? Susan whispered, her hand over her mouth. Dr. Patel looked at Alexander. Mr. Grayson, you're not a 1 in a million match. You are a perfect match. 6 out of 6 HLA markers. Identical. The lab ran it 3 times because they thought their equipment was broken. The hallway was silent. It's... Dr. Patel struggled for the words. It's the kind of match we only see between full siblings, or a parent and child. It is genetically perfect. Susan stared, her mind unable to process the words. But how? That's not possible. We need to start the procedure, Alexander said. His mind was racing, but his voice was calm. He was back in control. What's the next step? We need to prep you, Dr. Patel said, snapping back into medical mode. The donation, it's a procedure. We'll harvest the marrow from your hip. It requires anesthesia. I don't care. When? We can schedule it for. No, Alexander said. We do it now. Today. As soon as you can. Mr. Grayson, this is an operation, Dr. Patel insisted. And Sophie, she needs preparation. She needs a low dose of chemotherapy to wipe out her current, broken marrow, to make room for the new. The whole process takes days. Then start it, Alexander commanded. Start it right now. Of course, Dr. Patel said, still looking at Alexander with awe. We'll start her prep immediately, and we'll schedule you for the harvest tomorrow morning. He turned and hurried away, shouting for nurses. Susan was trembling, looking at Alexander as if he were an alien. A perfect match, she whispered. How? Alexander was quiet. His mind was a vault of information, connecting dots at lightning speed. A Marine, a widow, a man who idolized his grandfather. A perfect, impossible genetic match. Susan, he said, his voice very careful. Your husband, David. You said he was a Marine. What do you know about his father? Susan blinked, confused by the question. His father? Nothing. He never knew him. David's mother, she passed away a few years ago. She always said his father was a soldier, a hero, that he died in Vietnam before David was born. And David's mother? Where was she living when David was born? Alexander asked. I don't know. Somewhere down south, near a big army base. Fort Benning, I think. What? Alexander felt a cold, electric shock go up his spine. Fort Benning, 1968. His grandfather, General William Stonewall Grayson, had been stationed at Fort Benning for 2 years. Before his final tour, it was a piece of family history no one spoke of. The general had been separated from his wife during that time. A difficult patch, his father had called it. Mr. Grayson? Susan said. You're pale. What is it? Alexander looked at this woman. This quiet, brave woman who had been cleaning his floors. Susan, he said slowly. I don't think your husband, David. I don't think he was just a fan of my grandfather. He paused, the weight of a 50-year-old secret settling in the sterile hallway. I think, Alexander said, that David was his son. My grandfather's son. Susan's eyes widened. What? No. That's crazy. It's the only thing that makes sense, Alexander said. If David was my grandfather's son, that would make him my uncle. My uncle I never knew. He looked toward Sophie's room. And that, he said, his voice thick with a profound, terrifying revelation, would make Sophie my cousin. She's my blood. She's a Grayson. Susan collapsed into the chair, the implications washing over her. Her husband, the son of the man he idolized. Her daughter, part of a dynasty. The card, the name, the phone call. It wasn't a fantasy. It wasn't a desperate prayer. It was destiny, an echo of blood calling to blood. My whole life, Susan whispered, we were alone. We had no one. And all this time, we had family. Alexander looked at his grandfather's picture in his mind. The iron-willed stare, the legend, the man who lived by the code of duty, and the man who had abandoned a son. Alexander had spent his life trying to outrun the general's shadow. Now, he was being given the chance to redeem it. He finally understood. The money, the power, the empire, it was all meaningless. It was tin. This was real. You're not alone anymore, Susan, Alexander said. He put a hand, not on her, but on the chair beside her. A simple gesture of presence. I'm here. He turned as Dr. Patel returned with the team. Mr. Grayson, the doctor said, we're ready to start Sophie's preparation. And we need to admit you. Get your own pre-op tests started. Alexander looked at Susan. She was watching him, her eyes filled with a fragile, newborn hope. He looked at the small, blonde-haired girl in the bed. His cousin, his family. He nodded at the doctor. Let's begin. He walked away from his billion-dollar deals, from his empty penthouse, from the cold reflection in the glass. He walked toward his sterile room, toward a painful procedure. For the first time in his entire life, Alexander Grayson felt like he was finally living up to his name. The general's portrait on the wall no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like a guide. Duty, he thought, wasn't about the past. It was about what you did, right now. He walked into the room, ready to save his family. Alexander Grayson had never been a patient. He had never worn a thin, paper-like gown. He had never had a plastic bracelet snapped around his wrist, bearing his own name. His life was spent in boardrooms and penthouses, environments he could command. A hospital room, even a private one, was a box. It was a place of surrender. Frank had arrived at dawn. He stood in the doorway of Alexander's room, holding a tablet. He looked, as always, unflappable. Sir, Frank said, his voice low. The partners from the logistics deal. They are unhappy. They have been at the hotel for 24 hours. They are threatening to walk. Alexander was staring out the window. The sun was just beginning to turn the gray sky to a pale, bruised purple. He had not slept. Let them walk, Alexander said. Frank's eyebrow twitched. It was the only sign of surprise he ever showed. Sir, this is the deal you've been working on for 6 months. It's $500 million. It's paper, Frank, Alexander said, turning. It's just numbers. It's not real. He pointed down the hall, in the direction of the pediatric ICU. That is real. That little girl, fighting in that room. That is real. Frank looked at his boss. The man who lived by the stock ticker. The man who fired an executive last quarter for a 0.5% dip in projections. This was a new man. What are your orders, sir? Frank asked. Call Robert, Alexander said, referring to his COO. Tell him he is in full command of Grayson Holdings, indefinitely. Tell him to handle the logistics deal. If he can save it, good. If he can't, I don't care. Indefinitely, sir? Frank clarified. The word was heavy. I will be unavailable, Alexander said. I have a family matter to attend to. Frank finally allowed himself a small, thin smile. Yes, sir. I'll take care of it. And Frank, Alexander called as he was about to leave. The apartment. Susan's apartment. Done, sir. The back rent is paid. The lease is renewed for a year. Her things are being moved back in as we speak. I've had a deep cleaning crew go through. And I took the liberty of stocking the pantry. And the fridge. Alexander nodded. Good. And, Frank, sir, my grandfather, the general, I want you to find everything you can on a son he may have had. A man named David Miller. Mother's name unknown. Born near Fort Benning, late 1960s. A sensitive matter, sir. Extremely sensitive. For my eyes only, Alexander said. I want to know his story. I'll find him, Frank said. And he was gone. A few hours later, a nurse came to get him. It's time, Mr. Grayson. They wheeled him down the hall. He had refused any sedative, but they insisted on the gurney. He felt ridiculous, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling tiles flicking by, one after another. They passed the pediatric ICU. Susan was standing outside. She had washed her face. She was wearing a new set of scrubs the hospital had given her. She looked at Alexander on the gurney, her eyes wide with fear and a deep, shattering gratitude. Mr. Grayson, she whispered, stepping forward, as if to stop the gurney. Alexander put a hand up. It's Alexander, he said. It felt strange to say his own name. Go be with Sophie. I'll see you both after. She nodded, tears welling again. God bless you, Alexander. He was wheeled into the operating room. It was cold, bright, full of steel. A woman in a blue mask, the anesthesiologist, leaned over him. Okay, Mr. Grayson. Alexander, this will feel cold going in. I want you to count back from 10. He felt the prick in his arm. He looked at the massive, round light above him. It looked like a cold, bright eye. 10, he said. 9. He thought of his grandfather. He thought of duty. 8. He thought of a little girl with blonde hair. His family. He was asleep before he got a 7. He woke up in a haze. There was a deep, profound ache in his lower back. It was not pain. It was an absence. A hollowed-out feeling. A nurse was checking his vitals. It's done, Mr. Grayson, she said, her voice soft. The procedure was a success. The harvest was perfect. They're starting the transfusion for Sophie right now. He drifted back to sleep. Down the hall, in the PICU, a small bag of dark red, viscous liquid hung from an four-pole. It was not blood. It was marrow. It was life. A tube ran from the bag into a central line in Sophie's small chest. Susan Miller stood by the bed, her hand on her daughter's foot. She watched the slow, steady drip. 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 Each drop was a miracle. Each drop was a future her daughter was never supposed to have. Dr. Patel stood in the doorway, watching. It's in her, Susan whispered. It's really happening. Yes, Dr. Patel said. Now the hard part begins. We wait. We see if the new cells, her cousin's cells, take root. We see if her body accepts them. It will be a long few weeks. She'll fight, Susan said, her voice fierce. She's her father's daughter. She looked at Dr. Patel. And her uncles, too, I suppose. Dr. Patel nodded. She has a good team. And now, she has a chance. A real one. The next few days were a blur for Alexander. He was a terrible patient. He hated the bed. He hated the food. He hated the weakness he felt. The ache in his hip was a constant reminder of what he had done. On the third day, he broke protocol. Against his nurse's orders, he got out of bed. He put on the clothes Frank had brought him, a simple pair of gray slacks and a black cashmere sweater. He felt human again. He walked, slowly, stiffly, down the hall to the pediatric ICU. Sophie was in a different room now, a sterile bubble room. He had to look through a thick glass window. She was awake. She was pale. Her blonde hair was thin, but her eyes were open. They were a bright, piercing blue. Grayson eyes. Susan was inside, gowned and masked. She was reading from the tattered coloring book. Sophie saw him. She looked at the strange man in the window. Alexander stood there, just watching. He felt a connection so profound, so elemental, that it rooted him to the spot. Susan looked up. She saw him. Her eyes smiled above her mask. She put a hand to her heart, then pointed at him. A gesture of thanks. Alexander simply nodded. He stayed at that window for an hour. He said nothing. He just watched his family. The recovery was slow. Sophie had good days. She had terrible days. Her body, empty and defenseless, had to learn to build an army from scratch. Alexander's cells, her new marrow, began the slow, microscopic work of colonization, of building a new immune system. Alexander moved out of the hospital and into a hotel across the street. He did not go back to his penthouse. He did not go back to his office. His days took on a new rhythm. He would wake, have coffee, and read the reports Frank brought him. Not market reports. The first report was about David Miller. Frank had been thorough. A birth certificate from Georgia. A mother, a waitress, who died of pneumonia. And a father, listed as unknown. But Frank had found a letter. A small, water-damaged letter from the waitress to a friend, speaking of a charming, powerful general who had a sad wife, and who had broken her heart. It was not proof, but it was enough. Alexander had the letter sealed and put in his private vault. The second report was on Susan's finances. She had nothing. She was tens of thousands of dollars in medical debt. Alexander made a call. He set up a trust. He called it the Sophie Miller Foundation. He funded it with $50 million. Its purpose was simple: to pay for her medical care, her education, and her future, and to provide a stipend for her mother so she would never have to work again. After his reports, he would walk to the hospital. He would sit with Susan in the waiting room. They didn't talk much. At first, he would bring her coffee. She would tell him about Sophie's white blood cell count. He would listen. He learned the names of the nurses. He learned the difference between a good sign and a bad one. One day, he found Susan weeping quietly in the cafeteria. "It's bad," she said, before he could ask. "Her fever is back. They think it might be a rejection. The doctors, they look worried." Alexander sat down. He said nothing. He just sat with her. He shared her silence. "What if it was all for nothing?" she whispered. "What if I lose her anyway?" "You won't," Alexander said. His voice was a rock. "You don't know that," Susan cried. "I know her," Alexander said, surprising himself. "I've seen her. She has Grayson eyes. We are stubborn. We don't quit. And you are her mother. You didn't quit when you were homeless. You didn't quit when you were arrested. She has your strength. She will fight. And we will be here." Susan looked at him. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to anymore. She just nodded, took a deep breath, and stood up. "You're right. Let's go back." The fever broke. It was not rejection. It was the new immune system, graft versus host, a sign that it was working. It was fighting. A month after the transplant, Dr. Patel found Alexander in his usual spot, the chair outside the ICU. "Alexander," the doctor said. He was smiling. A real, wide smile. "Doctor, her labs today, they're beautiful. Her new T cells are active. Her white count is climbing. She's building an immune system." "Your immune system?" He clapped Alexander on the shoulder. "It worked. She's going to make it. She's going to be okay." Alexander felt his knees go weak. He leaned against the wall. He had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching. But this news, it undid him. He just closed his eyes, a single, sharp breath escaping him. "She can have visitors soon," Dr. Patel said. "Real visitors." 2 weeks later, Sophie Miller was in a regular room. She was sitting up in bed. Her blonde hair was mostly gone, a soft fuzz remaining. But she was laughing. Susan was showing her a new toy, a building set Alexander had sent. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Susan called. Alexander Grayson walked in. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a simple blue shirt. He felt awkward. He was holding a teddy bear. A new one. Soft, brown, with two perfect, shiny black eyes. Sophie looked at him. She was shy. "Sophie," Susan said, her voice bright. This is the man I told you about. This is Alexander. He's our family." Sophie looked at the bear, then at Alexander. "Is he a doctor?" she whispered to her mom. "No, sweetie," Susan said. He's a hero. He gave you a present. It made you all better." Alexander stepped forward, feeling clumsy. He held out the bear. "Hello, Sophie," he said. His voice was rough. I heard you had an old bear that was missing an eye." Sophie looked at her old, one-eyed bear on the pillow. Then she looked at the new one. She slowly reached out and took the new bear. She hugged it to her chest. Then, she did something that changed Alexander's world. She held out her other, thin arm. "Hug," she whispered. Alexander froze. Susan nodded, her eyes shining. He moved forward, leaning over the bed rail. He wrapped his arms around the small, frail girl. He felt her tiny arms go around his neck. She was warm. She was real. He held her for a long time. He felt a 50-year-old family wound begin to close. He was no longer just the man in the tower. He was no longer just the general's grandson. He was Alexander. He was family. He pulled back, and Sophie was smiling. "Your eyes are like mine," she said simply. Alexander Grayson felt a smile, a real one, touch his own face. "Yes," he said. "Yes, they are." He looked at Susan, over Sophie's head. He saw his past, his present, and his future, all in one small, sterile hospital room. The billion-dollar deal had fallen through. He had not even noticed. He had never felt so rich. And with that hug in a quiet hospital room, that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it's a reminder that our biggest transformations often come not from the empires we build, but from the unexpected calls we answer. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe winding down with a cup of tea, or just settling in for a calm evening. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. If you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve, so feel free to drop your feedback below. Thanks for spending this time with me.